about chapter 2 unit 2, which is about consideration. So in the previous videos we saw about unit 1, which is about the Indian Contract Act, the basic essentials, the valid essentials of contract, and then we saw about types of contract and also the elements and other features. So in this unit we will see about consideration. So what do you mean by consideration? So consideration is a fundamental element of valid contract, which means value which is exchanged between the parties involved. So already we saw that consideration means quid pro quo. That is something in written. For example, if A is entering into an agreement with B, wherein A is going to sell his car for 1 lakh rupee. Now what is consideration for B? B is getting car. That is his consideration for him paying 1 lakh. What is the consideration for A? A's consideration is that he is getting 1 lakh for selling the car. So basically it's something in return. For B, car is a consideration. For A, amount 1 lakh is a consideration. So it need not be monetary. Consideration is basically something in return. It can be monetary or can be non-monetary as well. So it's a fundamental element and it's basically the value which is exchanged between the parties involved. That is the price the promisee pays for the promiser's obligation. So here in this case, who's promiser and who's promisee? A is promiser and B is promisee. So whatever the promisee pays to the promiser, that is 1 lakh, is a consideration for A. So what about the legal definition? So legal definition is that when at the desire of the promiser, promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing, or does or abstains from doing, or promises to do or abstain from doing something, such an act or abstinence of promise is called consideration for promise. So basically at the desire of the promiser, the person who is making the offer, the other party is doing an act or is abstaining from doing something. So here he is doing an act which is nothing but purchase of the car. So here it's an act. At the desire of A, B is purchasing the car, which is an act. So let's take another example wherein we will see about abstinence. Now A has his textile business, a leading business in a particular city. Now B is intending to open a shop near his business. Now A doesn't want B to do so. So A asks B not to open his business in the same city, and if B does so, he is willing to pay or is ready to pay, let's take for example 10 lakh. Now in this case, A is asked not to do something, that is abstain from doing something. When you ask a party to abstain in the sense is nothing but prevent. So here abstinence is the consideration. For A, what is the consideration? For B, 10 lakh is the consideration for abstinence. For A, what is the consideration? For the amount 10 lakh that he is paying is nothing but abstinence. Over there it's an act and here it's an abstinence. So when at the desire of the promiser, promisee or another person has done or abstained from doing anything, or does or abstains from doing something, or promises to do or abstain from doing something, then that act or abstinence or promise is called consideration for promise. So now let's look into the key aspects. What are the key aspects for consideration? See, consideration can be an act, it can be an abstinence. So as we saw earlier, it can be an act. Act in the sense it's something that benefits the promiser. So over here, what is the act that B is doing? B is purchasing the car. Now this will benefit A, that is a promiser. Or it can be even an abstinence. So example for an act is that Ajay guarantees Bhuvan for payment of goods. Bhuvan sells on credit to Chaitanya. Here Bhuvan's act of selling goods constitutes consideration for Ajay's promise. So basically in this case, if there is a contract of guarantee, now in that case if a person, let's take for example A is selling goods to B and B is going to make payment to A. For that C is guaranteeing A that B will make payment. In case if B does not, then let me make payment. So in this case, what is the consideration for C giving guarantee to A? It's nothing but B has obtained goods from A, right? So that will be the consideration. Consideration as an abstinence. It can also be for abstinence, that is refraining. Refraining is something, nothing but preventing from doing something that would benefit the promisee. Example, Abhishek promises Bharti not to file a suit against her if she pays 1 lakh. Abhishek's abstinence from legal action is considered as consideration for Bharti's payment. Is take, for example, another example of abstinence. So A is going to file a suit against B. Maybe for any reason, A is going to file a suit against B. Now in this case, B has asked A not to file suit. And if he does not file a suit against him, then he will pay, let's say for example, 1 lakh. Now what is the consideration for A? 1 lakh for not filing a suit in the court of law. And what is the consideration for B paying 1 lakh to A? It's the abstinence. It's the abstinence of A from filing a suit against him. So it can also be for abstinence. But ABC offers 2 lakh to XYZ to prevent him from opening a competing shop nearby. Here XYZ's decision to abstain from opening shop constitutes consideration. See, consideration can be as an act, or it can also be as an abstinence, and it must move with the desire of the promiser. Now who's the promiser over here? Promiser is basically, so in the above example, if you go to see, A is the promiser. So here A is the promiser. It can be the desire of the promiser, must occur at the request or desire of the promiser. Here usually the promiser, the offerer, fixes the price of the goods. Source of consideration, it can be from promisee or can be from any other person as well. Third party can provide consideration for promise. Earlier we saw that whenever a particular offer is made to a person, only that person can accept the offer, not anyone else. But usually the thing is, consideration can move from promisee, that is B, or it can be from any other person as well. Let's say for example, C is making payment on behalf of A will accept the same. Because it's not really required that only B will have to make the payment. It can flow from any other person as well. So it can be as an act, it can be as an abstinence, and consideration can move from third person as well. And source of consideration, and then we saw about the timing of consideration. And we'll have to see. Yeah. So consideration can be for past, for present, or for future actions. And take for example in this case past consideration. A performs a service for B, and at B's request later B promises to pay. This is valid as past consideration. Let's take for example, you procure any service from any person and then you later make the payment. That's an example of past consideration. Present consideration, cash sale of goods. Cash sale of goods is one wherein we sell the goods and immediately we receive the payment. That's an example of present consideration. Inadequate consideration. Okay, we'll see about that later on. Timing of consideration can be past, present, or future. So what are the key aspects of consideration? It can be an act, it can be an abstinence, it must move at the desire of the promiser, source of consideration, and then we saw about the timing of consideration. So conclusion. Consideration is generally the mutual exchange of value between parties in a contract. It can be an act, an abstinence. It is beneficial to one party while causing detriment to another. So what do you mean by that? So beneficial to one party while causing detriment to another. Like take for example in this case, if B is making the payment of 1 lakh to A, then it benefits A, whereas it's detriment, meaning causes loss. So maybe we can say reduction in amount of money that B has or B holds. So it is benefit to one party and then it's detrimental to the other. Legal rules regarding consideration. So consideration is generally very important for you to form a valid contract. So because we already saw that agreement is nothing but offer of proposal plus acceptance plus consideration. An agreement plus legal enforceability will become a contract. So consideration is very important to form a valid contract. Now what are the legal rules regarding consideration? First thing being, consideration must move at the desire of the promiser. So generally it must be provided. So it moves to the desire of the promiser. It's fixed by the promiser offerer, and it will be given either by the promisee, and it can be given either by the promisee or by third party. So this generally means written element of consideration. For example, in Durga Prasad versus Baldio, market was constructed at the request of collector, not the promiser. There was no binding contract as consideration was deemed void. Consideration may move from promisee or from any other person. We already saw that it need not necessarily be the case that only the promisee will have to make the payment. It can be from any other person as well. That is, it can be by third party. On behalf of the promisee, any third party can also make payment to the promiser. What about executed and executory consideration? Executed is something that's already done, so it's paid. Whereas executory is yet to be done. So executed consideration means, for example, If A pays 5,000 to B and B promises to deliver wheat, it's executed consideration. Whereas if some promise is done, it is required to be done in the future, then it's an executory consideration, and it can be past, present, or future. It need not be adequate. So what do you mean by this? Like, for example, A is selling his house to B. Market value of the house, let's take for example, is 50 lakh, but A is selling only for 30 lakh. So in this case, is it invalid just because the value is less than the market value? I mean, the sale value that A is offering to B is less than 50 lakh, which is the market value. Just because of that reason, this contract is not going to be invalid, because consideration need not be adequate. It can be inadequate as well, because it's decided based on mutual consent between both the parties. So it need not be that it has to be, it has to reflect the equal value. It can be less than adequate value. Generally, it means it can be less than market value as well. Performance of what one is legally bound to perform. What do you mean by consideration? It's nothing but a legal obligation of a party. Okay, so let us look at this point again. Performance of what one is legally bound to perform is not a consideration. Is not a valid consideration. What do you mean by this? Like, take for example, if at all a particular crime scene happens and there's a witness. Now, generally, this witness will have to present the facts in the court of law. For that, he is not required to get any amount from any person, because this is something that one is legally obligated to perform. For that, there is no consideration as such. Consideration must be real and not illusory. It means that it must have some legal value. That can be adequate or inadequate value, doesn't matter, but it has to have some legal value. It must not be illusory or impossible. Illusory meaning it should not be something which is kind of an imagination or something that's impossible. For example, that magic example that we saw, person is A is telling B that he will discover treasure by magic, and that B will have to pay 2 lakh to him. This is a kind of an illusory consideration, and it's not valid. So consideration must not be unlawful, immoral, or opposed to public policy. So consideration must be lawful. Like in the previous example, or in the this video, we saw that A is offering his house to B, and B in turn is paying narcotic drugs. He's giving him narcotic drugs, which is again an illegal thing. So consideration generally should be lawful, should be legal. Any consideration, if it's immoral or against public policy, it cannot be valid. In that case, the contract will turn out to be an illegal contract, and then it will become a invalid contract. So we saw about past consideration, present consideration. What about inadequate consideration? Inadequate consideration meaning, so for example, a house is selling worth 60 lakh. That's the general market value at which the house will be sold. But then it's sold only for 10 lakh. Does not mean that the contract is void, because unless undue influence or coercion is proven. Suppose a person is threatening other to purchase a house from other party, a house which is generally selling for 60 lakh, he is asking the other party, is coercing or threatening the other person and is buying the same for 10 lakh. In that case, it becomes a voidable contract. If it's cost due to, see, consent will have to be free, it has to be voluntary. If consent is not free, meaning, what do you mean by when the consent is not free? When the consent is caused due to coercion, fraud or misrepresentation or mistake or undue influence, then the consent is not said to be free. When the consent is not free, then in that case it turns out to be voidable contract. So voidable contract means at the option of affected party, the affected party can choose to make that contract a valid one or can continue with that as a void contract. So illusory consideration. In that case again, consideration will have to be a legal consideration, should not be imagination or should not be illusory. Otherwise it can be adequate or inadequate, and that's completely fine, unless and until it's caused due to coercion or undue influence. In that case it would turn out to be a voidable contract. Illusory consideration. Illusory is something which is based on imagination. Like for example, a promise to perform magic to find treasure is invalid as it's illusory. So what do you mean by contracts? Contracts are valid and enforceable agreements. What do they mean by this? Agreement, contract is equal to agreement plus legal enforceability. So contracts are nothing but agreements which are enforceable, which are valid and enforceable. Summary of validity of an agreement without consideration. So like in certain cases, if we go to see, there are some agreements which are valid even without a consideration. Like take for example, so generally agreement is nothing but offer a proposal plus acceptance There has to be an offer, there has to be a person who is to accept the same for consideration. Only then it's said to be a valid agreement. So there has to be an element of consideration. But in certain cases, agreements are valid even without consideration. Now there are 7 such cases. One is natural love and affection. If the agreement arises out of natural love and affection, then in that case it's said to be valid even without consideration, provided it's documented and registered. Compensation for past voluntary services. So if at all past voluntary services are compensated under specific condition, in that case it is said to be valid even without consideration. Promise to pay time bar debt. Usually time bar debt cannot be recovered, it will become invalid. But if the other party is making the payment without expecting any consideration from our side, then in that case it is said to be a valid agreement even without consideration. Agency. So to appoint an agent is one who is appointed by the principal to carry out activities or business activities or transactions on his behalf. So for appointing an agent, no consideration is required. And a completed gift. So gifts are generally given with no expectation of getting something in return. So gifts are generally agreements which are valid without any consideration. Bailment. So bailment also does not require consideration. Bailment is nothing but, so bailment can be classified into 2 categories. One is gratuitous bailment, another one is non-gratuitous bailment. Now, what do you mean by gratuitous bailment? Gratuitous bailment is nothing but a bailment which is done with no expectation of any consideration. Non-gratuitous is basically where you expect something in return. So bailment is nothing but a contract wherein you deliver or you transfer the possession of goods for a specific purpose or for a particular period of time. Once it is done, you will get back the goods. Like for example, you want to get your what is bailment contract? So bailment is also a special type of contract. Bailment is nothing but you transfer of goods for a specific purpose or a fixed period of time. Do you transfer the possession or ownership? You transfer only the possession of goods for a specific purpose or for a fixed period of time. And once that purpose is done, once the purpose for which it has been transferred has been accomplished, or maybe the time is the fixed period has expired, then in that case you get back the goods. Like take for example, if A's TV has got repaired. So in this case, A wants to get it repaired. So he transfers the possession of TV for repair. So transfer of goods for a particular purpose over here is repair. Once it is repaired, we will give back the goods to A. Now in this case, A will obviously have to pay money to B. Like take for example, in this case it's 2000. Now this bailment is an example of non-gratuitous bailment. Non-gratuitous is one wherein there is expectation of something in return, whereas this consideration flowing in. So bailment can be gratuitous bailment as well. Take for example, Mr. E is going on a vacation for 10 days and wants to leave his pet dog at his neighbor's house. So the purpose for which he wants to leave his dog is for them to take care of the dog for 10 days. So in this case, once A comes back after 10 days, we will give the dog to A. In this case, A is not going to pay any money for the service. So this is an example of gratuitous bailment. So in case of bailment, even without consideration, it's a valid agreement. Charity. Now charity is something that's done without any expectation of something in return, so it is a valid agreement even without consideration. Certain examples are given over here. For natural love and affection, husband promises in a registered agreement to pay his earnings to wife. Now this arises out of natural love and affection. It's a valid agreement even without consideration. He promises a golden necklace worth 5 lakh to his daughter-in-law, documented and registered. So it's a valid contract. Compensation for past voluntary services. P returns R's lost wallet. R promises to pay P 10,000 for the past voluntary service they paying, which is again an agreement which is valid without consideration. Mr. X helps Mr. Y in a court case. Mr. Y promises to pay Mr. X 10,000 as compensation. This is again a voluntary service that is rendered by Mr. X, which is a past voluntary service, and for which Mr. Y is paying compensation or consideration now, which is again a valid agreement without consideration. Promise to pay time bar debt. A owes C 60,000, but the debt is barred. A cites a promise to pay 50,000 in settlement. So promise to pay time bar debt, again it's an agreement it's an agreement which is valid without consideration. Agency, there is no consideration, that's need to create an agency under section 185. Completed gift. Donates a valuable item to B. This gift is valid without consideration. Usually gifts are valid agreements without consideration. Bailment. Mr. A gives Mr. Y the keys to a storage facility where Mr. Y's goods are kept. This is again a valid agreement without consideration. Charity. Mr. G promises Mr. K to donate 1 lakh for temple renovations. Mr. K incurs expenses based on his promise. So these are all examples of agreements which are valid even without consideration, because usually agreement, for it to be valid, need to have some consideration, but in this case, even if there is no consideration, this is a valid agreement. Thank you.